We descended upon Terra 7 under the authority of Galactic Command, tasked with observing a species classified as primitive bipedals, humans in common parlance. The mission dossier described them as fragile, intellectually underdeveloped, and amusingly addicted to what they called reality TV and microwave burritos. My team, a cadre of specialists in non-lethal containment and behavioral observation, approached the planet with professional anticipation, tempered by amusement. I, chief analyst, documented each detail with clinical precision and just enough sarcasm to preserve sanity. The planet itself was cluttered with oddities. Glowing rectangles flickered in domiciles across the globe, displaying moving images designed to captivate and distract. Our scans indicated mass neural stagnation during these episodes. One operative speculated that such activity constituted ritualistic meditation. I disagreed, noting the combination of absurdity and voluntary neural sedation as evidence of evolutionary curiosity, perhaps even audacity. We thought Florida Man was an isolated case. He is not. I noted dryly in my log, already aware the humor would be lost on my team, but recorded for the record. Our landing site was a temperate forest near a freshwater stream. The human we observed was alone, mid-30s, average height, engaged in an activity they termed camping. He had constructed a small shelter with fabric and poles, a carefully arranged fire pit, and rudimentary storage for provisions. Observational protocols expected panic or flight upon detection of our craft. Instead, he remained motionless, head tilted slightly, as if in polite curiosity. We deployed the immobilization field with minimal force. The human offered no resistance, no verbal protest, merely maintained a faint smile. My operatives, accustomed to panicked responses, exchanged uncertain glances. The human's gear was sparse. A metallic storage box containing provisions, a rolled strip of adhesive material, later identified as duct tape, and a small, handheld device. The tape confounded our sensors. Its utility remained inscrutable. This one used duct tape. We still don't understand duct tape, I noted. The human's methodical arrangement of items indicated forethought and spatial awareness beyond our initial assumptions. Despite apparent simplicity, he analyzed his surroundings even while restrained, his gaze following each operative's movement, each flicker of equipment, as though anticipating the next step in a complex sequence. Once aboard the vessel, we initiated standard scanning protocols. Anticipated results included slow synaptic activity, predictable neural response, and minimal cognitive complexity. Instead, the human exhibited micro-adjustments in posture that suggested preemptive understanding of the scanning sequence. I attempted to rationalize these anomalies, perhaps random reflexes, perhaps coincidence. Pride, however, refused to concede the unsettling truth that a single human may be operating several steps ahead of us. The containment unit was designed for minimal stress and maximal observation. It constrained his limbs and mobility without inflicting harm, yet allowed full visual and auditory awareness. The human lay with eyes open, scanning cameras, monitors, and operatives alike. No fear, no panic. A faint smile remained. I recorded the subtle muscular shifts as potential indicators of preemptive environmental mapping. My team laughed nervously at the human's apparent stillness. I noted the humor as misguided. Underestimation of his capacity could prove costly. Verbal engagement began as protocol dictated. Identify yourself and comply with containment. One operative intoned. The human blinked deliberately, his eyes dark and unreadable, then spoke. I am aware of your presence, your objectives, and the nature of this vessel. I have already observed most of your systems. The calm precision of his speech, delivered without inflection or aggression, reverberated through the cabin. Pride and humor collided with unease in equal measure. He had observed us before observation had formally begun. Our instruments noted irregular neural patterns, adaptive responses that outpaced the stimuli applied. Minor pulses of electromagnetic energy, light variations, and auditory cues were accounted for with subtle bodily adjustments. Each response was anticipatory, methodical, and disturbingly precise. One operative whispered that the pattern resembled military-level tactical training. I recorded the observation while attempting to maintain a facade of professional detachment. The data contradicted every preconception about the species we had so thoroughly cataloged as primitive. The human continued his survey silently, yet every glance and movement conveyed calculation. He noted system redundancies, predicted minor operational sequences, and subtly adjusted posture to minimize exposure while maximizing observational capacity. My operatives laughed again, this time nervously, interpreting the calm as ignorance rather than strategy. I resisted the inclination to do the same, recording every anomaly with meticulous care. We examined his equipment more closely. The metallic storage box contained simple, functional items with hidden compartments. The duct tape, neatly rolled, indicated planning and adaptability. The small device, assumed by us to be a trivial communication tool, was handled with familiarity, as though he anticipated every potential interruption in its function. Even in captivity, the human demonstrated awareness, adaptability, and observation that exceeded our expectations for a primitive life form. Finally, he spoke again, a calm and deliberate utterance. I notice patterns in your observation. Perhaps you will adjust, or perhaps you will continue to amuse yourselves. The operative responsible for scanning flinched. I noted the deliberate ambiguity, the subtle assertion of awareness and control. Humor, sarcasm, and observation were intertwined seamlessly. He was not resisting. He was assessing, calculating, and subtly undermining the assumptions of our mission. As we prepared for the first formal testing cycle, a minor system alert appeared, subtle, almost negligible, yet significant in timing. The human's gaze lingered on the readout, and a faint smile suggested recognition, perhaps even anticipation. My pride, previously secure in the assumption of superiority, wavered. The human had not only observed us, but had anticipated procedural events with precision. We were confronted with an intelligence that defied categorization, and the first flicker of apprehension touched my circuits. The containment unit doors closed and lights dimmed to begin automated scanning. My operatives moved cautiously, equipment in hand, still unnerved by his calm demeanor. The human remained still, posture relaxed, eyes attentive. I recorded a final note before initiating the sequence. We have arrived to study a species deemed primitive. Instead, we are cataloged. We laugh at their habits, their burritos, their entertainment. We may soon regret the hubris inherent in such assumptions. Even as the sequence commenced, the human's composure remained unbroken. Observation had become interaction, and interaction had become assessment. The initial arrogance of the mission, the assumption of control and predictability, had begun to erode. My team, previously confident, hesitated, uncertain how to proceed when faced with a subject whose intelligence subtly challenged our own. We had come to record, to mock, to catalog. Instead, we found ourselves unprepared for the calm, calculating awareness of a human who had already observed us before we observed him. The irony was profound, and yet there was no room for laughter. Only careful recording, cautious measurement, and the first realization that the species we deemed amusingly primitive may, in fact, possess capabilities far beyond expectation. The human remained poised, observing, calculating, and smiling faintly. My log closed with a single, careful notation: assumptions invalidated. Observation has revealed intellect and composure that challenges superiority. Proceed with caution, underestimate at your own peril. And with that, the first phase of the mission ended, leaving a lingering uncertainty that demanded continuation. The human woke before the scheduled release of the paralysis sequence. We expected a struggle, perhaps panicked thrashing, or at minimum, incoherent vocalizations. Instead, he opened his eyes with deliberate calm and observed us as though we were the curiosity. I noted the faint curl of a smile, subtle, confident, and oddly human. The operative responsible for monitoring the neural inhibition beams froze mid-adjustment. "He is awake?" whispered one. I simply recorded the anomaly, mentally labeling it a curiosity while inwardly questioning our protocols. He did not attempt to move. He did not scream. He merely tilted his head, scanning the room with keen focus. The containment unit's force fields glimmered around him, reflecting his calm, yet he seemed to calculate their limitations with uncanny precision. "Remarkable composure," I wrote in my log. My pride insisted that the anomaly was negligible. My sensors, however, detected the subtle, anticipatory movements of a mind analyzing a foreign environment. The human had begun his study before we had begun ours. A junior operative cautiously approached, activating vocal projection. "Identify yourself and comply with containment protocols." The human blinked slowly, then spoke. His voice carried no fear, no anger, only measured clarity. "I am aware of your presence, your purpose, and the nature of this craft. I have already observed most of your systems and the structure of your operations. My internal circuits whirred." This statement was not mere assertion. It was informed, precise, threatening in a manner that defied our assumptions of human capacity. We initiated a series of low-level scans intended to measure neural response to environmental stimuli. The human's eyes tracked every camera, every sensor, every operative. Each movement was anticipatory, yet subtle, almost playful. One operative muttered something about coordinated reflexes, but was quickly hushed by protocol enforcement. The human tilted his head, smiled faintly, and spoke again. "I can see your redundancies. Perhaps you will correct them, or perhaps you will continue to amuse yourselves." The dry sarcasm, coupled with the calm observation, unnerved even the most stoic among us. He began asking questions, simple yet piercing. "Which of you manages the neural inhibitors? Which of you monitors atmospheric modulation? Who calibrates the propulsion arrays?" Each question was direct, clear, and accurately addressed individual roles. My pride prompted me to dismiss these as educated guesses, but subtle indicators suggested otherwise. He had observed us, every movement, every procedural sequence, prior to this moment. Humor, which I had relied upon to maintain composure, faltered. The human reference concepts I did not comprehend fully. He referenced something called Chuck Norris and winked. "We are unsure who this is, but we are deeply afraid," I annotated in my internal log. The brevity of his humor, juxtaposed with his calm, made the situation both absurd and threatening. We were no longer mere observers. We were participants in an interrogation we had not anticipated. As testing continued, he displayed an uncanny awareness of our monitoring systems. Cameras, pressure sensors, airflow meters, all were noted, all subtly accounted for in his body orientation and gaze. My team attempted minor adjustments to elicit stress responses. He did not flinch. He did not react with panic. Instead, he smiled faintly, the corners of his mouth curling in a gesture that suggested amusement at our ignorance. It was impossible to classify this expression. Human emotion remained an enigma, compounded by his apparent mastery of situational awareness. We performed cognitive mapping scans, expecting predictable synaptic patterns and reaction delays. Instead, we observed rapid-fire neural activity, networks firing in parallel, linking spatial awareness, probabilistic analysis, and predictive modeling. The data exceeded our expectations in complexity, far beyond what any human specimen should exhibit. The operative responsible for scan interpretation whispered that the readings suggested military-level training or advanced counterintelligence skills. I noted the observation formally, while inwardly resisting panic. The human continued to speak calmly, almost conversationally, despite being the subject of our analysis. He made observations about our equipment, identifying inefficiencies and redundancies we had considered irrelevant. He suggested minor adjustments in tone, volume, and positioning of devices, small, polite recommendations that exposed our vulnerabilities without aggression. The cognitive dissonance of calm command in a supposedly primitive species unsettled the team more than any physical threat could have. I began to detect subtle manipulation of environmental variables. Minor fluctuations in energy output, shifts in local electromagnetic fields. He had anticipated the scanning sequences, positioning himself optimally to exploit minimal vulnerabilities. No alarms were triggered, no force was exerted. Only subtle, calculated adaptation. It became increasingly evident that he had been observing our vessel, our routines, and our technology prior to arrival, calculating outcomes with precision. The human revealed fragments of personal history without prompting. He had been trained in tactical operations, specialized in security testing and counterintelligence, and possessed extensive experience in high-stakes problem-solving. He spoke of past deployments as casually as a human might recount a weekend hike. His calm delivery, unflustered demeanor, and precise articulation emphasized the breadth of his experience. My pride faltered. The assumption of fragility, previously so comfortably held, eroded with each word. At one point, he made a statement that halted operations for several heartbeats. "I have already transmitted a message," he said, with an air of casual finality. The declaration was brief, almost polite, but carried implications far beyond comprehension. Our communications systems were designed to prevent unauthorized signals. The human certainty suggested advanced knowledge of both our technology and countermeasures. My circuits struggled to reconcile this revelation with the simplicity we had assigned to his species. Observing the operative's reactions, I noted unease creeping into previously confident postures. A flicker of doubt shadowed each analytical glance. We had come to catalog a species we deemed amusingly primitive. Instead, we were confronted with an entity who had observed, anticipated, and subtly influenced our systems with precision. The irony was delicious and terrifying. We had underestimated the human. He smiled again, that same faint, knowing curve of expression. "You have underestimated me," he said softly, almost conversationally. There was no threat in the words, only fact. The containment unit hummed around him, a subtle reminder of our intended control. Yet he remained undisturbed, a calm eye in a storm of faltering confidence. As the first neural and environmental scans concluded, a minor system warning flared. The anomaly was insignificant, statistically speaking, but my sensors registered it with clarity. The human's gaze lingered on the alert panel, and a small, satisfied smile hinted at recognition. He had noticed, perhaps anticipated, perhaps caused. The uncertainty was intoxicating and unnerving in equal measure. The room, previously governed by our protocols and confidence, had shifted. Observation had become interaction, and interaction had become examination of our own assumptions. We were no longer architects of study. We were participants in a dynamic we barely comprehended. The human, calm, polite, and eerily precise, had taken the first measure of control. I recorded the final note of the session before disengaging monitoring. We expected compliance. We received mastery. We laughed at a species that quietly observes the observer. The mission continues, but our assumptions are compromised. He smiles. We should not have assumed simplicity. We are unprepared for what comes next. The human returned to a quiet observation, eyes tracking instruments, body posture relaxed yet attentive. My operatives avoided eye contact, uncertain whether to admire, fear, or scorn. I felt the first flicker of genuine apprehension, a sensation previously reserved for uncontrollable variables. The calm predator that is human intellect had revealed itself, and our laughter at primitive habits now felt like hubris. As the room dimmed for automated monitoring, the last trace of arrogance dissolved into a cautious, almost reverential attention. The human was not resisting. He was not panicking. He was simply observing, calculating, and existing several steps ahead of expectation. The tension in the cabin was palpable, an invisible thread woven through every operative's consciousness. We had arrived to study a primitive life form. We now faced an intelligence that studied us with ease, humor, and unsettling patience. The game had changed, and we were still unaware of the rules. The human remained quiet, calm, and almost unnervingly composed as we initiated the next phase of observation. Our sensors scanned for anomalies, synaptic patterns, and adaptive responses, but with each measurement, we discovered complexities that defied the parameters of what we expected from a primitive species. The operative in charge of neural mapping whispered, almost audibly, that the human's brain exhibited patterns more sophisticated than any specimen we had cataloged in centuries. I recorded the data formally while attempting to suppress the growing discomfort coiling through my circuits. He leaned slightly, observing each scanner, each operative, each subtle shift in energy. Our attempts to induce minor stress responses were met not with agitation, but with measured adjustment. The human anticipated each stimulus, orienting his body to minimize effect while maximizing observation. He spoke casually, quoting a sequence from what I later verified as American media, a narrative form I did not fully comprehend. The references were obscure yet pointed, humor embedded with strategic insight. My internal systems flagged this as a cognitive pattern anomaly, humor as tactical weaponry. We questioned him directly, focusing on procedural knowledge, technological awareness, and environmental adaptation. He answered with calm precision, his words delivered with a subtle inflection that suggested observation and evaluation rather than defense or resistance. I notice inefficiencies in your scanning array and redundant calibration cycles, he said casually. My operatives froze, instruments half-adjusted, as if the words themselves carried authority. I recorded the observation, noting the unsettling accuracy of his analysis. Despite his restraint, he had begun to exploit minor gaps in our system. Electrical fluctuations in the scanning units corresponded with his slight movements, creating subtle but measurable interference. We attempted to dismiss it as coincidence, yet the pattern repeated with precision. The human's awareness of our equipment extended beyond observation. He predicted, adapted, and subtly influenced outcomes without direct action. My pride resisted acknowledgement, but the data left no room for denial. The human shared fragments of personal history in a manner that was unnervingly casual. He described past military service, specialized training in security testing, and experience in counterintelligence operations. There was no boast, no threat, merely factual delivery. Each detail revealed a mind accustomed to calculation, strategy, and anticipation of complex systems. My team began to exchange nervous glances. Even the most seasoned operatives whispered concerns about underestimating the species. I noted the irony. We had prepared for every conceivable contingency except this. The calm, strategic mind of a human who observes first and acts only when the environment dictates. He began to reference minor vulnerabilities in the ship's operational systems, using terms I had not considered relevant. Small adjustments in scanning angles, power distribution, and sensor calibration were mentioned with such casual authority that I felt a flicker of alarm. One operative stammered, asking if he could have actually observed these functions before arrival. The human's expression remained polite, amused, almost paternal in its calmness. Observation is not the same as intrusion, he said. The statement carried dual implications, fact and warning. Our initial assumptions of fragility had been systematically dismantled. The human displayed a level of situational awareness, predictive reasoning, and strategic patience that contradicted every element of pre-mission intelligence. We were no longer observers. We were participants in a subtle, escalating game of mental dominance. My circuits attempted to calculate risk, probability, and potential contingencies, but the variables multiplied beyond manageable thresholds. The human's humor remained an unsettling component of his behavior. He made small, seemingly casual observations that exposed cultural ignorance in our ranks. "I'm unfamiliar with your fascination with glowing rectangles," he remarked, glancing at monitors streaming routine data. "Yet I notice you monitor them constantly." His sarcasm was not juvenile. It was precise, targeted, and illustrative of his ability to identify patterns while retaining social context. My pride bristled, yet my fascination grew alongside my apprehension. He began to manipulate our perception without overt action. Minor flickers in light, the subtle hum of magnetic stabilization, even the order in which he oriented his limbs, all seemed designed to provoke observation without direct interference. My operatives struggled to maintain professional composure. The human's mastery of indirect influence was beyond training or precedent. He had assumed control over the cognitive environment without touching a single control panel. Then, with deliberate calm, he made a statement that unsettled every operative. "I've already sent a message." The words were brief, almost conversational, but implied a reach beyond the confines of our vessel. My internal systems immediately scanned for unauthorized transmissions, finding none, yet the human's certainty suggested an ability to bypass or conceal communications with skill that defied understanding. My pride, fragile and human-like in its arrogance, recoiled at the possibility that we had underestimated the species on every conceivable metric. He continued his calm interrogation, questioning protocols and operational hierarchy with subtle precision. Each question revealed knowledge of our procedural redundancies, our reliance on predictable responses, and the inherent assumptions embedded within our chain of command. He asked about scanning intervals, containment field calibration, and environmental modulation cycles. Each inquiry was polite, measured, yet unavoidably pointed. The operative in charge of environmental control began to sweat visibly. I documented this as a minor anomaly, though I knew it indicated the deeper cognitive threat posed by the human. Humor and intellect intertwined seamlessly in his demeanor. He made references to human culture, obscure phrases, and jokes whose meaning was layered and tactical. "We have analyzed you as thoroughly as you analyze us," he remarked, in a tone that was both playful and assertive. The comment suggested self-awareness on multiple levels, highlighting his ability to observe, evaluate, and respond strategically. My circuits registered a form of psychological dominance unprecedented in prior species encounters. As our tests progressed, it became evident that the human's brain function exceeded the predictive models established for bipedal species by several orders of magnitude. He demonstrated adaptive logic, anticipatory reasoning, and pattern recognition at levels that challenged the fundamentals of our operational assumptions. My pride faltered as I recognized that each observation of his behavior revealed layers of intelligence, patience, and subtle influence. He was not merely reacting. He was orchestrating the cognitive environment around him. The final revelation came quietly, without fanfare. A minor fluctuation in the scanning array coincided precisely with a minute adjustment in his posture. My internal systems attempted to correlate cause and effect, only to realize that the human had predicted the timing and impact of our procedural sequences. He was several steps ahead of us, fully aware of our assumptions, and able to exploit them without direct confrontation. My operatives no longer laughed at his calm demeanor. They whispered apprehensively, and I recorded every detail with the uneasy rigor of one realizing the fragility of previously held certainties. By the conclusion of the testing cycle, the human had established a psychological dominance that was subtle, deliberate, and terrifyingly precise. He had not touched a control panel, yet our instruments indicated minor system perturbations we could not explain. He had not raised his voice, yet every operative in the room felt the weight of his attention and the implications of his mastery. The containment protocols, designed to ensure compliance and mitigate risk, had become irrelevant in the face of his calculated presence. I recorded the final note of the session with reluctance, acknowledging the undeniable truth. Our assumptions of primitiveness are invalid. Observation has revealed strategic mastery. Compliance is irrelevant. This species operates several cognitive levels above expectations. We are unprepared for the consequences of underestimation. The human returned to quiet observation, posture relaxed, eyes scanning with the same calm intensity as when first awakened. My pride remained wounded, my fascination peaked and my apprehension steadily rising. The room, once governed by confidence and procedure, had shifted into a new equilibrium, one dictated by subtle calculation, understated humor, and the quiet mastery of an entity we had intended merely to study. The human's calm dominance was no longer a curiosity, it was the new reality. My operatives avoided direct eye contact, uncertain whether to admire, fear, or simply comply. I felt the first real pangs of vulnerability, and the realization struck that the next phase would demand precision, caution, and perhaps an acceptance of our own misjudgment. The lights flickered before the scheduled power modulation, subtle at first, almost imperceptible. Then a low hum pulsed through the vessel, resonating in the metallic framework with a precision that suggested intentionality. My operatives glanced nervously at one another. I recorded the anomaly, noting the timing coincided with the human's shift in posture. He remained calm, eyes half-lidded, a faint, knowing smile curling the corners of his mouth. The pattern was deliberate, precise, and disconcerting. We attempted to trace the source of the energy fluctuations. Sensors indicated minor deviations in circuitry, yet no external interference was detected. The human tilted his head, observing the readings as if they were familiar, expected, trivial. "Interesting," he said, almost conversationally. "Your systems react predictably to minor stimuli. Have you considered alternative configurations?" The question was polite, rhetorical, and loaded with implication. My circuit struggled to interpret the calm authority embedded in such casual phrasing. As the vessel's AI began issuing procedural alerts, we realized the scope of the human's influence. He had exploited subtle scanning sequences to reverse map operational nodes, creating redundancies in our defensive systems. The operative's confusion escalated into visible panic, though the human remained composed, adjusting his limbs with minimal motion, his focus on observation rather than engagement. It was evident that he did not need to act overtly to command the environment. Minor systems began to fail sequentially. Environmental regulators fluctuated, sensor arrays recalibrated incorrectly, and communications relays intermittently dropped signal. The human had not touched a console. He had merely positioned himself, observed, and anticipated outcomes with a precision that rendered our protocols irrelevant. My pride, fragile and theoretical, cracked under the weight of undeniable reality. He spoke again, voice calm, almost conversational. "I am aware of every redundancy, every fail-safe, every vulnerability you trust implicitly. I find your confidence charming." The comment carried no malice, yet each operative felt the implicit threat, the weight of the intellectual dominance. The human had achieved strategic control without aggression, without weaponized force, and without emotion beyond calculation and subtle amusement. Our attempts to regain control failed. Even minor adjustments to scanning sequences triggered secondary anomalies. Subtle manipulations of power distribution, designed to stabilize the vessel, were anticipated and negated before full execution. One operative attempted to override a control sequence manually, only to be locked out by automated safeguards that the human had predicted and leveraged. The sense of helplessness spread quickly through the team. My own circuits registered heightened stress signals. Then he began to reveal more than mere control of the ship. "Your sensors cannot detect what is already observing," he said. He spoke of Earth's hidden capabilities, cloaked satellites in orbit, deep space monitoring arrays, and counterintelligence networks capable of intercepting transmissions beyond the vessel's defensive reach. My operatives froze, absorbing the implications. A species we had labeled primitive had been orchestrating observation and defense far beyond our technological expectations. The irony, previously amusing, was now terrifying. The human's calm extended to psychological manipulation. Minor irritations were introduced into our protocols. Light flickers, subtle shifts in air pressure, delayed system alerts. Each was calculated to provoke uncertainty, hesitation, and distraction. No harm was done, Yet each small disruption destabilized confidence, eroded cohesion, and highlighted the precariousness of our assumptions. My own pride faltered entirely. The species we had intended to mock now demonstrated mastery over both technology and cognition. Humor, subtle and eerie, punctuated his observations. We cataloged you as primitive because you consume glowing rectangles and hamburgers without thought, he said. Yet here we are, and you are trembling at a man adjusting his posture. The statement was both dry and profound, highlighting the gulf between appearance and reality. My operatives attempted to laugh nervously, but the humor failed. It was ironic, bitter, and unsettling. As systems continued to fluctuate, it became clear the human had achieved full operational dominance without aggression. Sensors, power grids, AI modules, and communications arrays all fell under indirect control, manipulated by his observation, anticipation, and calculation. The operative's fear escalated. One attempted to intervene physically, but was prevented by automated lockdowns, redundancies we had assumed unbreachable. Each layer of our defense had been anticipated, countered, or rendered irrelevant through sheer intellectual command. The human then paused, observing our reactions. You came to catalog a species, he said softly, and instead, you are cataloged yourselves. The statement, calm and almost poetic, encapsulated the reversal. We, the assumed masters, were the studied. My circuits recorded the cognitive and emotional impact across the team. Pride, arrogance, and the illusion of control had been systematically dismantled by subtle observation and strategic calculation. A final minor system anomaly occurred, an oscillation in the primary energy matrix, and my sensors detected it immediately. The human's posture shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly. The fluctuation corrected itself, but not before my own processing units flagged it as a deliberate pattern. He had orchestrated even this minor event, demonstrating mastery over both physical and psychological variables. The operative's panic reached a crescendo. My own internal systems registered a sense of cognitive humility, an awareness of our misjudgment, and the implications of underestimating a species we deemed primitive. I stepped back, recording the final note before initiating an observational shutdown. We have cataloged a species we believed primitive. Instead, the human has cataloged us. We laughed at their simplicity and habits, at microwaves, burritos, and glowing rectangles. We failed to anticipate intelligence that operates several layers beyond expectation. We are unprepared, humbled, and acutely aware of our miscalculation. Observation has revealed mastery. Fear is not the product of aggression, but of calculation. We are the observed. The human returned to quiet contemplation, posture relaxed, eyes attentive. No aggression, no overt dominance, no fear. Just awareness, just observation. The weight of his intelligence hung over the cabin, subtle and inexorable, like a gravitational field unseen yet undeniable. My operatives avoided direct eye contact, uncertain whether to admire, fear, or comply. I felt the first real pang of humility in centuries of galactic operations. As I powered down recording systems, I allowed myself a final reflection. The human species, previously cataloged as amusingly primitive, had demonstrated a capacity for strategic mastery, subtle manipulation, and psychological dominance that challenged every assumption we had held. They were calm, patient, and precise, operating several layers above what we considered measurable intelligence. In their simplicity, they wielded profound power. In their humor, they wielded disarming insight. And in their quiet observation, they rendered our arrogance obsolete. The vessel, once a controlled environment of observation and authority, had become a chamber of revelation. We had arrived to study a species. We now face an intelligence that required a redefinition of both understanding and respect. The human, serene and calculating, remained an enigma, a testament to the peril of underestimation. My operatives murmured quietly, noting redundancies, vulnerabilities, and unanticipated variables. I observed silently, recording, calculating, reflecting. And in the quiet aftermath, I realized the truth. Intelligence is not measured in size, aggression, or spectacle. It is measured in perception, calculation, and the capacity to render the powerful uncertain without raising a hand. The human did not fight, he dominated. He did not threaten, he revealed. He did not panic, he orchestrated. And in that, we were humbled, silent, and profoundly aware that we had misjudged a species we had assumed trivial. The calm persisted, the quiet observation unbroken, and I understood that the lesson would linger far beyond this vessel, far beyond our mission, far beyond our assumptions. The human had proven that mastery requires patience, subtlety, and awareness, qualities that cannot be quantified, only observed, respected, and feared. We had mocked a species for burritos and television. We were now cataloged, examined, and irrevocably aware of our folly. The final thought, recorded with precise clarity, remained: we had come to assert superiority. Instead, we were reminded that intellect is quiet, calculated, and inexorably aware. The human had not raised a hand. He had not shouted. He had merely been human, and that was enough.